Hello and welcome to the next series of Sea Conversations titled Drawing Out Natures. My name is Rupali Gupte. I teach at the School of Environment and Architecture, and I'm also one of the co-founders of the school. My colleague Rohit Muzumdar will be moderating this lecture series. But before we begin, I want to introduce another very important initiative that the School of Environment and Architecture and the Society for Environment and Architecture, which runs the school, has initiated, and that is called the Center for Spatial Studies. One of the things we realized during COVID was that emerging technologies have enabled new and in that we also realized that older forms of educational institutionalization, which is asset dependent, certificate dependent, has made many things stagnant in many ways, expensive, static, and also constrained in disciplinary boundaries. And so what we sought to start is this, the open pedagogy program under the Center for Spatial Studies, which in some ways is a more agile institution, which in many ways changes relationships between institutions, learners, teachers. CSS courses are exploratory and experimental and based on new research undertaken by its members. And so in that sense, what we say is that these courses are not generic, they are based on new research. And so in no ways are they competing with any of the generic courses that one would find online. And I think the last thing that we are also very, very interested in as part of the Center for Spatial Studies is collaborative academia. And under collaborative academia, we would like to invite people to participate as mentors, learners, people who would offer new courses. This is the website. We're sharing the link for the website. The course modules that we are offering are, its details are on the website with the schedule, and other things that one can go to. But I think what is more important for us to announce over here is this idea that we are launching this tripartite structure of the Center for Spatial Studies being the open pedagogic program, collaborative academia, and a kind of robust research program that its members are running. So we invite all of you to participate in this program and hope we can, build this kind of agile institution together. So that's the poster. Those are some of the immediate programs that we're going to structure under it. But we would also invite all of you to participate as both mentors, offerers, learners in this course. So thank you so much for this. And with that, I would like to invite Rohit Muzumdar, my colleague, to introduce this particular series. Thanks.
Thanks, Rupali. Thanks a lot. I welcome everyone again to the Sea Monsoon 2022 Sea Conversations series. The series is titled Drawing Out Natures. Before I talk about the series and our speaker today, just want to let you know this online series of conversations for the Monsoon 2022 is supported and co-curated by the Shared Ecologies program of the Sharma Foundation, along with ongoing support of the Urban Center Mumbai. So these have been our partners in supporting this program. The series for this monsoon, titled Drawing Out Natures, has emerged from the research that has been ongoing at sea at the School of Environment and Architecture since its inception, within the areas around environment and spatiality. There are 4 initiatives that we have started at the School of Environment and Architecture. Our work explores monsoonal ecologies in tropical coastal landscapes in South Asia, natures of post-extractive landscapes, and the architectures of healing that come to address the post-extractive conditions, particularly around mining. We are exploring the writing of a history of shifting environmental discourses in Mumbai. And we are looking at, we are researching on human and modern human natures and the architectures of cohabitation. So these are the 4 initiatives from which this particular series of Sea Conversations has emerged. And broadly, if I have to kind of locate some of its contours, I would identify 2 widespread responses that become important to locating the kinds of conversations that we intend to initiate in this series. So we witnessed 2 widespread responses to the turbulences and uncertainties that threaten to transpose the shared ecologies of our worlds to a putative tipping point of ecological crises and climate emergencies. First, the nature culture and ecology economics dualism has translated over the course of the last 3 centuries into the bureaucratic simplifications of complex knowledge systems, into regulatory approaches to sustain our habitats. Such simplifications now find articulation in visions based in large, centralized, quantitative database cartographic information systems to manage and re-engineer territories, resources, and populations. Concurrently, and that's the second tendency that we notice, that there has been a proliferation of diverse activist engagements across the world whose protagonists aim to undo the injustices that, according to them, lie at the heart of the visions to regulate, manage, and re-engineer territories. Advancing rights-based approaches to the environment, such activist engagements have been working towards straightening or pushing back the forms of regulation, management, and re-engineering embedded in the bureaucratic simplification of complex knowledge systems. As such, both these tendencies expand or erode social-spatial claims on shared ecologies of the worlds that human and modern human life inhabits. Beneath the skin of crises, emergencies, and the contestations which come to expand and erode our social-spatial claims in the shared ecologies of our worlds, lies the role and work of imagination. Imaginations invent worlds and also how we come to understand them by constructing realities based on specific ways of seeing and sensing. In this lecture series, in the series of Sea Conversations, we deploy the phrase drawing out natures in its broadest sense to mean 2 things. First, in focusing on drawing on natures, we intend to develop an engagement towards making visible the invisible relations between natures and the natures of agency. And second, it is also a methodological exploration to advance multiple possibilities towards decolonizing and democratizing ecological and climate imaginaries. The scholars, practitioners from diverse fields whom we are inviting to these series of conversations have been engaged in asking such questions and pushing the boundaries of these fields together. Our first speaker for the Monsoon 2022 series is Fotini Takirdiki. Fotini Takirdiki is a doctoral student and program curator in the field of experimental learning spaces. Her PhD project, Political Ecologies of Knowledge in the Anthropocene, is embedded at the Institute of European Ethnology at the Humboldt University of Berlin, as well as the Institute of Arts and Media at the Potsdam University. So welcome, Fotini. It's a pleasure to have you here in this series of Sea Conversations, and as the first speaker of this series. in this conversation, the question that Fotini raises is, what does it entail to regard the ecotone as a pedagogical framework and an experimental field for learning, for relearning urbanism? So that's the question that she's focusing around, and I'll hand the floor to her. So welcome again, Fotini.
Thank you so much, Rohit. Just 1 second for sharing my screen. And yes, then I would like to start. Hello and good afternoon, everyone from Berlin to Mumbai. My name is Fotini Takirdiki, and I'm very happy and thankful for this great opportunity to give this talk as part of the SEA Conversations, Drawing Out Natures. As Ruud already anticipated, I will introduce the concept of the ecotone to you, and I invite you to explore it collectively with me by activating your imagination. So imagine you now leave the environment you are staying in at the moment that I cannot see, and you enter the ecotone. Ecosystem 1, a terrestrial zone, meets ecosystem 2, an aquatic zone. Ecosystem 1 is inhabited by species group A, trees, deers, birds, snakes, and spiders. While ecosystem 2 is the living space of species group G, herons, ducks, fish, algae. Between these diverse landscapes, a new ecological zone, a swamp, emerges. This is the ecotone. Here, the two adjacent ecosystems, as well as the distribution of the species, overlap, and a new community of ecotonal species, reed, moss, frogs, and dragonflies is integrated. The term ecotone is used in geography, biology, or landscape ecology, where it describes a dynamic transitional area with changes in vegetation and high levels of species interaction. It is composed of the prefix eco for ecology, an ancient Greek word tonos for tension. And it can be translated as a place where ecologies are in tension. The transition lines between the two areas can either be sharply defined, limes convergens, or gradually fuzzy, limes divergens. The influence of the two bordering communities on each other and the tendency of the ecotone to take on a character of its own is known as the edge effect. And next to that, the transitions change in their structure, size, and scope due to climate change and other human-induced factors, which makes them sensitive bioindicators of current and future climate change. They can be seen as regional observatories or hotspots of anthropogenic impact on the environment. When I talk about the potential of the ecotone in an educational setting, I want to point out two specific aspects of the concept. Ecotones as more than human interfaces where manifold relations unfold. So as a facilitator of biodiversity or planetary health. As well as, and that's the second aspect, a vessel for imagination between the known, unknown, and not yet known. And therefore as an experimental field for learning and for developing alternative pedagogies. Starting point of this endeavor to dive into the concept of the ecotone was a call for articles that led to the book project Planning Miseducation, Relearning Urbanism Within, Against, and Beyond the University. There will be a collection of stories that create alternatives to the globally established concepts and theories of urban planning beyond conventional planning educational settings. And from there, certain questions emerged that I investigated and that I keep investigating. Namely, how can planning education pave the way for post-anthropocentric environments, like for instance, more than human cities? What does it entail to regard the ecotone as a pedagogical framework and an experimental field for relearning urbanism? And more concretely, what educational practices and methods and activities emerge from it? And yeah, I want to explore these questions together with you today. I approach these questions in multiple ways, and this will also be shown in my presentation. I conducted ethnographic fieldwork at the swamp site Briesetal in North Brandenburg in Germany, close to Berlin, as one exemplary ecotone. And some of these field notes from my ethnographic investigations will be introduced in between the sections in the form of eco-writings. And connecting to that, there is an underlying literature review informed by concepts of more than human urbanism and critical eco-pedagogy. And I'm also connecting to explorative interviews held with planning practitioners that worked as preliminary work for my further concepts of educational experiments that I will introduce later. So before further diving into the ecotone, I want to briefly contextualize the underlying problem or major question and challenge. So although concepts of nature-based solutions and ecosystem services and other sustainable projects have been trending in urban areas in the last 2 decades, most cities have kept co-producing the Anthropocene, the era where the human is the biggest influence on planet Earth and its Earth systems. And since it is so because the planning system and the infrastructures are still based on logics that amplify human exceptionalism and the modern hyper-separation of nature and culture that create today's climate emergency. Theories and writers inscribing their works in the post-humanist, new materialist, and ecofeminist movements, and that have been driven by indigenous knowings like Rosie Predotti, Donna Haraway, and Karen Barat, agree that we need to rebuild our relationships with nature that humans are actually part of. And a number of planning theorists connect to this movement, call for critically reframing the city-nature nexus and for adding relational thinking to the planning agenda, for challenging anthropocentrism and building more than human cities. So critical urbanism, assemblage urbanism, landscape urbanism, biourbanism, amongst others, are manifestations of this new direction in planning. Here is a quote from Cecily Moller's book, Healthy Urban Environments, More Than Human Theories. It is also part of this movement. More than human thinking helps to show that seeing, knowing, and continuing to live with the animals and plants already extant in cities is a key part of making cities biodiverse, more ecocentric and healthier places for both humans and other species. Using a more than human lens repositions existing knowledge about the benefits of nature in cities, which importantly can be used to further decenter humans and change the way we think about cities. So, yeah, the question that I asked, or that also other theorists and planning theorists are asking, is have these developments in urban ecology and alternative urban research fields also made their mark in the wider spheres of education and planning education? How do planning schools critically depart from conventional planning paradigms? And how do other academic knowledges, like for instance, the post-humanist and new materialist turns, enter the planning school as stimulators for doing otherwise and learning otherwise? So please mind, I'm not offering the ecotone concept as opposed or disconnected from all this work that is existent, but instead I want to introduce it as a means to transport the underlying critical ecological ideas into the spheres of planning education by offering a pedagogical metaphor, and also more than a metaphor, a method. And yeah, so what might these ideas mean for educational practice? Do I follow the man-made, predetermined banal path? How do I feel part of it without overstepping its boundaries? I slip through its permeable membrane and enter its fragile interface, trying to leave things out of order, uncontrolled, appreciating a seemingly abandoned, neglected, spontaneous vegetation, whilst tripping over a limb that some nature must have left for me. As a base for developing concrete pedagogical concepts and educational activities, I interweave the aforementioned ideas of more than human urbanism with critical eco-pedagogy informed by educational philosopher Paulo Freire from Brazil, and socio-ecological modes of learning by the anthropologist and cybernetician Gregory Bateson. So if we apply Paulo Freire's critical pedagogies of the oppressed that he conceptualized in 1970 to a more than human planning framework, we would have to address non-humans as social minorities and therefore treat them as co-creators of knowledge and also as active agents in planning processes, instead of just treating them as passive backgrounds and surroundings. Through a Freirean lens, we also do not neglect the human, and we don't think that there is a one-dimensional human. Yeah, we would be aware of all the power relations and keep a double perspective on both human and non-human dimensions, on both environmental and social justice. And I'm quoting Paulo Freire here: teachers and students, leadership and people, co-intent on reality, are both subjects, not only in the task of unveiling that reality and thereby coming to know it critically, but in the task of recreating that knowledge. As they attain this knowledge of reality through common reflection and action, they discover themselves as its permanent recreators. And next to that, Gregory Bateson's idea of an ecology of mind refers to a reshaping of the relationships with nature and environment by describing the unity of biological and social networks of nature and mind. He points out that it is crucial to acknowledge the systemic, interdependent nature of the world, as well as the cybernetic linkages between the individual organism, the society, and the larger ecosystem. So accordingly, in order to delve into ecological modes of learning, planning learners would first need to unlearn binary oppositions between human and non-human, culture and nature, as well as city and nature, or the wild and the city. So the task would be to undo past learnings, to let new patterns of thinking and knowing emerge. The question is how and where this unlearning might happen. And with this question, the conceptualization of ecotonal educational experiments began. And here is a very short but also powerful glimpse of Bateson's work that's used as a fundament. The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think. So now to the where and how. Learning from and within ecotones means paying attention to the feedback from ecosystems and cultivating a sensibility to notice, feel, and respond to the feral qualities of our physical surroundings by decentering the human. As a side note, feral is a term used to describe a domestic animal turned wild. So exploring the feral in the planning context aims at focusing on the environment's unanticipated reactions to human intervention or invasion, as well as emerging more attentive to the entanglements of ecological and human worlds. It implies freeing the learner from disciplinary restrictions, delving into a messy, untamed, and undisciplined way of learning, and allowing an experimental practice. And this experimental mode intends to initiate the thought, research, and conceptualization process of every planning activity that takes place in the Anthropocene, and that both in academic and in post-academic spaces. There is and cannot be one blueprint for an experimental design in this context, but nevertheless, I want to draw guiding lines to develop site-specific educational experiments. And yeah, I will present them in the following. So the following layers can be understood as touchstones for designing feral exercises. These are not supposed to be fixed and rigid and also not linear, but rather they should be extended and adapted alongside experiences from educational practices. So this is like a first draft of layers, but the idea is that there will be more added, and this should be a collaborative act. The first layer is based on the agents of educational experiments. So if we think of the agents, experiments in planning education would need to be collaborative in various forms. So the more heterogeneous the group, the better. A closer relationship between urban planners, architects, urban ecologists, and landscape architects would then be needed across spatial scales and all planning stages. So therefore, ecotonal educational experiments should be designed as an inter or transdisciplinary endeavor beyond separated planning silos and faculties. And next to that, collaborations are also needed on site in the field with non-human entities, as well as with local dwellers and human actors that are there on site, by engaging with them and integrating them into the field as active agents without exploiting them. The second layer refers to the setting of the educational experiments. Planning learners would start their research and practice from within ecotones. In our case, swamps, for instance, where I did my autoethnographic fieldwork. And yeah, there are two aspects, namely ecotones as facilitators of planetary health and as vessels for imagination would then be in focus. The ecotone as an alternative health, and I'm seeing something changed on my screen, but Rohit would give me a sign if something changed for you in your vision. All right, I'm continuing. So everything is fine?
Yes, everything is fine. Please continue.
Perfect. So the ecotone is an alternative learning environment for situated knowledges and knowledge ecologies. So learners would dive into engagement in real-world learning arrangements and take nature as event, which means that from within these transition zones that are described in the very beginning, in between where those edge effects take place, learners are asked to observe what species, flora, fauna, or other non-human entities interact with each other and with the human aid. The third layer delineates the feral nature of the experimental praxis and its methods. In order to grasp the relational potential of the field, ecological approaches to learning suggest a mapping of the in-between. And although the planning universe and cities are quite violent places, we still suggest, or this learning practice would suggest a slow looking and close-up observations and non-linear, thorough explorations. In order to be able to trace more than human encounters, flows, collaborations, or conflicts that emerge within these transitional zones. Rather than calculated forms of tracking and site analysis, a critical urban pedagogy calls for experimental forms of messy mapping that encompass field-based engagements. And the for now last and fourth layer relates to the imaginative and anticipative modes of experimenting, because learning should be seen as discovery and as curiosity towards unknown worlds. Thereby, the unfolding of ecotones of the imagination, which is also the title of a sci-fi book, that address deeper environmental questions shall be triggered by fostering imagination, speculation, storytelling, and artistic intervening in the space where the known meets the unknown, when new ways of knowing the environment and planning also for it might emerge. So a critical urban pedagogy beyond anthropocentrism is supposed to nourish the development of a socio-ecological urban practice within and beyond the university. This means planning is an eco-political matter that concerns society, including non-human actors, and which also means that it needs to be relearned in every faculty, department, institution, or office to collectively respond to planetary scale environmental crises. And educational experiments within this framework can be seen as a way to do so. This requires the learners to be exhaustive and thorough, and it demands both cognitive and bodily perception. And yeah, in the following, I want to collectively with you explore an exercise called Feral Pathways, which is an attempt to create and exemplify such a learning experience. And the layers of the ecotonal educational experiments should invite both educators and learners to develop more experiments following this ecotonal concept and to depart from them. So, although I cannot see the videos of you, and otherwise I would have now suggested to close your cameras, but it's not demanded in here. But yeah, in the next minutes, I invite you to take part in the exercise Feral Pathways. So feel free to, everyone now close your cameras as done, and to look around you and try to find an ecotone in your environment. And please mind, the ecological concept pertains neither to rural nor urban settings. It can happen everywhere, and one does not have to leave an urban environment to find and study it. Together, we will briefly explore this exercise, but feel free to try it out in your educational practice more thoroughly. For now, please grab a piece of paper and a pencil. Lloyd, if you want to, did you want to say something?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, no, because your sound turned on. And for everyone who did not find an ecotone, feel free to use these video snippets from Briesetal in North Brandenburg in Berlin to imagine you are part of the ecotone and you are embedded in it. So we are entering phase 1. Navigating, walking, anchoring. The first phase of the exercise is about navigating oneself towards the ecotone and its transitional zone, and to find territorial anchorage. So if you're sitting right now, feel free to stand up, to walk around and look for an ecotone in your environment. Either inside the built environment you're in, or you can experience it possibly through a window. And as I just said, if both does not apply, immerse yourself in the video and use your imagination. Arrive, keep walking, and explore the ecotone by slow looking. Now ask yourself, when and where do you feel your mind has been connected to your environment? When has your mind been entangled or even one with your environment? Please make some notes, short jottings and keywords. And further, what experience has changed the way you know and relate to nature or the environment? Again, feel free to make some notes. We now move to phase 2. Mapping is knowing, is relating. Focus on the relations and associations between the environment and you, and try to map them. Use pencil and paper and just get going. Do not overthink or over-strategize. Maybe the following questions help doing so. How does the environment affect you? How does the environment react to you? Do you recognize or feel any movements in your surroundings? What non-human inhabitants, what plants or animals interact with you, and how? Focus on relations between bodies, space, time, and matter, but also on affective relations that can be sensed. The last phase is called Ecotones of the imagination. And it is not a closing of the experiment, but rather the end of this exercise. Open your imaginative spheres. What specific feeling, sensation, or experience could be extracted from the site you are investigating? Maybe go back to your notes or your mappings. Pick one sensation. What stories, imaginaries, anticipations, visions emerge from it? Draft a little sketch or write down a working title of your vision. We now all leave the exercise and return to our desktops. And I invite you to go to the text field of Zoom and to, if you're able to, pick a random participant and send them a private message with either the working title or possibly 3 keywords that grasp the sensation or relation you have experienced. And otherwise, if you cannot send a private message, also feel free to just send it in the public chat. Thank you so much for participating and in this exercise, and please continue what you have started and possibly integrate it into a current practice or project, or it could be a starting phase for one. So before I end this talk, I want to share some field material with you. So this exercise that I've done in very short and without seeing you and without being on one side together with you, I have done this educational experiment with my bachelor study course of media studies at the University of Potsdam at Düstere Teiche, which means dark, uncanny ponds, a swamp site in walking distance from the university campus in Potsdam that students have actually not visited before. And here you can see some sketches and mappings that were later a starting point for creating concepts for hybrid museum spaces between nature and culture. So you can see, without going into detail, but you can see how different the sketches and mappings are. And this sketch here on the lower left shows the density of how much interaction there is between human and non-human actors. And the darker, the more interaction there is. The sketch next to it shows a mapping of movement of the seminar group and of non-human actors that move in between. Another sketch here on the very right, documents each and every human-made part in this natural fragile zone. And as I said, this was the starting point for further concepts that are still being developed in this course. And furthermore, Veronica Frances, an architectural teacher in Brazil, that is also part of the book project, that also Rupali and Prasad is part of, told me that she used the concept of the ecotone for a field trip to a border area in Brazil, which is an avenue that passes through the Quinta Normal subway, and that separates an area declared as typical heritage zone and a large park with multiple non-human inhabitants. The sketches are being done in Portuguese, and some of them I could decipher, but she mentioned that that there were also other modes of documenting and taking field notes and collecting field material. There were videos and more sketches. Yes, but here on the images you can see how the students approached the field, and that somehow it triggered creativity for further investigations. And yes, so with this, I also want to encourage you to try it in groups and to share it and collectively grow the repertoire of exercises derived from the ecotone and to use it in your own ways. And because, as I said, I did not want to offer a rigid and fixed concept, but rather to open up metaphor, but also more than a metaphor, a method to conceptualize and to use it as an experimental learning field. I realized that the material conception of my shoe shapes the environment, that each molecule of my scent changes the atmosphere, that every sensation of mine affects my surroundings, with all its human and non-human dwellers, the same way it affects me. Mosquitoes biting me, slugs being scared of me, birds playing with me. In sluggy slowness, I sharpen my senses to see the whole in ultra multicolor 360-degree dragonfly vision, acknowledging without fully knowing. I imagine that the swamp knows and that it remembers me, against my unwillingness to understand it. Feral streams of rambling, flows of circulation as being part of the large Gaian dialogue. And yes, with those last bits of my field notes, I want to shortly end my talk and want to thank all of you for participating and paying attention, and again to thank Rupali Gupta, Prasad Shetty, and the rest of the team for inviting me to this series and for being good virtual hosts. And here are the reference of the talk. And as I mentioned, I'm very open to get in touch with you, and if you have done if you've done the exercise and want to share your sketches as well, or if you want to share your approach to it, feel free to contact me and get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fotini, for that lovely talk. I mean, it was really wonderful, the opening out of the blur, the fuzziness between the dualism of land or earth and terrestrial and aquatic life that you kind of opened out. Ecotone seems it is not only a visual, it's a spatial, but also a sensual metaphor, that it has got multiple possibilities of working with different kinds of senses to think about space. And there's a power to that, to push realms of thinking that we otherwise currently, are kind of straitjacketed in. So that power in terms of opening out the tonality, the tone and the tonality as an idea to think about spatial imagination, presents a very powerful. Also in your talk, the guidelines of educational experiments. So kind of identifying certain coordinates, the agents, the settings, the feral natures, imagination, anticipation. I mean, that I kind of, that's something that really kind of struck me as a very important area of the way you're approaching these things. And with regards to both these, as you were explaining your ecotone idea with your visuals from Berlin, Potsdam, and I was trying to connect them to the visuals that came to my mind in Mumbai. And the ecotone in Mumbai, if I have to think of the swamp land, the marshland, and several spaces that lie between the so-called binaries of the terrestrial and the aquatic, the intertidal zone, the marshland, the swampland, the edges of rivers, so on and so forth. One of the images that strikes me is you have not only more than human life, but also different kinds of human lives situated in all of these places, in cities such as Mumbai, and that the nature of the human is not singular in that sense. The way in which indigenous groups connect with different human life as well as modern human life in their environment is very different from the way in which low-income residents do that, and very different from in which middle class or higher income residents do that. So while the ecotone idea as an idea, as a concept, opens out the setting, that in terms of the tone, there is a focus on the human and more than human life. It's two different things. And would there be tonalities open that need to be opened out between both of these in terms of setting up relations? That's it's not human and non-human, but there are tonalities of beings of different kinds with different kinds of relationships. So not only the context, but the agents involved in the setting, which is that need to be opened out as a tonal idea. I was wondering if you would have thoughts on this, because this kind of sharply struck me emerging from my context situated over here. The second thing that struck me was, as I saw through the educational experiments that you put down on paper. So could you open out a little bit more on how the senses, not only in terms of the fields, but the coordinates in terms of senses? So if our imagination of land, the terrestrial and the aquatic, has emerged from an understanding of the hard line between both of them, then what are the coordinates that through the senses break some of these boundaries, and what has kind of emerged through some of these experiments as you spoke? At present, I have these 2 points. So as to how do you draw out, what are the coordinates of drawing out the feral natures? And secondly, in terms of the ecotone, how do you open out the binary that itself gets set up between the human and modern human, or the dualism that gets set up there while the context gets opened up? So those are the 2 points that I have.
So regarding the first question or comment is, it is very important that as soon as one focus on interactions with the non-human, that one keeps in mind that there are also from an anthropological perspective, that there are many differences between humans and how not only their socioeconomic backgrounds and also their ontological backgrounds. So how do they relate to nature and world? And one needs to keep those differences in mind in order to, if one thinks about thinking of socio-ecological transformation, that this transformation is a very nuanced movement that integrates all these differences. So by also relating to, which I experienced myself, to the local dwellers, and also from an ethnographic perspective, field perspective, to engage with them and to find out about how they relate to the environment, and to get into this exchange. This was kind of the how it showed in the field, how one could connect both sides and have this double perspective in mind. And yes, in order for, if you think further, to plan and design for just spaces that are just, as I said, in a social and environmental way. Now I'm not sure if you have further questions regarding that point, or if I got your point correctly.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, and your second point of the feral natures, how to grasp this untamedness, and how the senses can be sharpened, and how this imaginative sphere can be activated, and to go beyond the boundaries. This is a very, again, unstrategic movement. It's something that emerges from, as like Bruno Latour says, territorial anchorage, from also being in the field on site, and to start to really focus on the relations that of the movements and the associations and the relations, by, as I mentioned, this slowness, and trying to change the perspective and view by being able to map all these, and through this artistic, creative method, one could see, or when I could see it on in my own practice, but also from the feedback of the students, this openness of the mapping method, and this also like the drawing practice, even if it's very simple, and you could see it was very different how these drawings took part, but somehow they were a translation of how the senses reacted to the space. And again, asking back to you, like if I was able to contextualize your question.
Yes, you were. And the reason why I asked this in a kind of I'll talk a little bit about the work that I have been involved in as I've kind of, engaged with scholars who've been trying to open out the idea of the blur, the fuzziness. For instance, and it was a pleasure to kind of hear you open out similar areas through the concept of the ecotone. Since in my kind of engagement in conversations with Dilip Takuna and his and Anuradha Mathur's work on blurring the hard line between land and water in the context of tropical monsoonal estuaries, and the proposition that he makes of thinking about forests as infrastructures holding wetness, as one kind of goes on field walks and thinks through some of these provocations, and one sees slow transformations that are taking place not only within human life but also more than human life. One of the things that I've felt is that one needs further analogies beyond a broader heuristic frame, whether it is of wetness or of ecotone. So what are the from the observations in the field and these drawings that you kind of showed us, which were very important kind of, or even the texts as observations from the field, what kind of conceptual analogies could emerge that could make the tone, the ecotone, far more nuanced and multiple as conceptual ideas to think about relationships. So it opens out the setting, the context, but how can we kind of understand relations in more material and conceptual ways through analogies that emerge from drawing out in the field in multiple ways. That's where I was kind of heading. And what I realized in the work that we've been doing is that life, which is human life and more than human life, as well as built form, whether it's of different kinds, both foliate and exfoliate. And the processes of foliation and exfoliation emerge from certain forces. So then to think about life within this zone, the blurred, the fuzzy zone, that certain spatial analogies could kind of start pushing or supporting or lending or become hinges to kind of not only think of the blurring of the contextual setting, but also talk about the space, the form, and the processes analogically, conceptually, metaphorically. So that's where I was trying to go at with my comment was coming from some of the work that we've been doing at the School of Environment and Architecture. So yeah, so that's where it came from.
Thank you. Yeah, and also it was interesting, and yeah, no, I just want to mention also, I don't know if you know, but like Berlin's area is swamp land, so back before glacier times. And I think now my internet connection is bad. I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, perfect. So Berlin doesn't only have a bad internet reception, but also, as I said, it's based on swamplands. So, and there I found it interesting that there was like a connection point between Mumbai, that apparently there's many ecotones in the spheres. And I was wondering if you use the word ecotone, or if you put those transitional zones into, if you were looking at them in one concept, or if you focus on them in your work.
Well, we've been trying to develop our own work through analogies that have emerged from conversations with different kinds of people living. Our work has focused around one estuarine system, and the different kinds of habitats within that, which have human and more than human life. And as we go back to our field, as we've gone back to our field notes of different kinds, one of the things that emerged was the idea or the notion, the concept of foliation or exfoliation, which is forces and energies which kind of shape not only life but also space, and the connections between them which transform the built form in these environments. So that's something that we're trying to open out, to move beyond languages of resilience or care. And that's something that came from the field. So, I mean, never used the term ecotone, but I think it's kind of beautiful and powerful to open out the tonalities, but kind of think through it more carefully as I go through our work. Okay, with that, I'll just invite people from the audience, if they have comments or questions, and open the floor to the audience. So yeah, you can type your questions in the chat box, or you can raise hand and we'll invite you and make you a panelist. I think take some time to send in the questions.
Yeah, I'm very, very curious who's sitting there. You probably know better if you see the names, but
Yeah, so I see a hand raised. So Rupali wants to ask a question. Rupali. Yes, Rupali. Rupali, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks so much, Fotini, for the talk. It was it's beautiful, very poetic. I think one of the interesting things that you said was, in that exercise when you were inviting people to the exercise, is that you don't have to go too far. It's not like you have to reach out there and go to the forest, but these ecotones are around you. And I think that's a very powerful concept. And we've been kind of also working with this idea of the blur. What does it mean to think of ideas of blurring? And what are sort of our means of thinking beyond the idea of questions of property, questions of hard edges, through which we imagine our sort of structures of knowledge. So I think that's a very beautiful concept. And I think one of the things that I think my colleague Sabha is also here in this panel, and what she does is she takes people for walks and starts to kind of think of the idea of care. What does it mean to think through the ideas of care? And you start looking at your environment around you in completely different ways then, right? So I think that's how do you kind of mobilize these methods of seeing is now, get out of the city, go into the forest, or go sort of far out there where life is very different. So I think that's a useful mobilization. What does it mean to think of ecotones as concepts? And what does it mean to then reshape our own kind of our own sort of, given structures of thinking through these conceptual frames? So yeah, I mean, it's not a question, but it's just something that I wanted to bring up. Yeah.
No, yeah, I like. I mean, it's like putting on the lens and looking through it and changing the lens. But yes, so when I chose the ecotone of the swamp, and I actually took the train outside of Berlin because it's a very beautiful swamp, and swamps were very. They were everywhere. In multiple exhibitions, there were swamp schools and many swamp. At this very popular nightclub, there was like a swamp exhibition here in Berlin. So somehow the swamp had this. It was dragging people there, and then I was also asking myself, like, why did I choose this ecotone? Like, why can I not find it here in the urban sphere? So I was also like questioning myself, and yeah, some answers were that swamps are very fragile and critical zones, and that are in danger of collapsing, and also spheres where one cannot see the human like interventions in the first place, but still they're indicators of human interference. So yeah, but nevertheless, as I said, I asked myself and had like this different view, and saw those little ponds on the street, and saw, okay, these are the transitions between built and natural environment within the city. Those are all little ecotones, and perceive that there's actually new architectural styles of vertical artificial wetlands in the city. So suddenly there were all ecotones, of course, with my lens. But yes, it's I also asked myself, like, why did I go all the way outside to learn and unlearn? Yeah.
Thanks, Fotini and Rupali. We have another question for you from Sanika Malvankar. The question that she asks is, while I'm trying to understand the concept of ecotones, can you give more examples of ecotones other than swamps? Should you include humanly built environments, which are now isolated / abandoned? It kind of connects with the conversation that you were having with Rupali. You could elaborate.
I was just thinking that that it quite closely connects to that. Yeah, so if you look into an ecology book, then an ecotone is really either the shore of a lake or the moment when forest meets grasslands, like those transitional zones. It's never like just a hard line made by nature itself. It's like the transition zones between aquatic and terrestrial, or forest and grasslands, marshlands. And so from an ecological, biological, or geographical perspective, it's all those different places I just mentioned. And if you derive from that, as I just mentioned, and if you look at urban ecotones, then one could also include the transitions inside between built and natural environment inside of cities, and possibly also that are abandoned, where yeah, or if you look at Chernobyl or other places where the transitions quite fluid. Yeah.
Thanks. So Sanika, there, Fotini is kind of trying to point out to the transition between two kinds of what are seen as two kinds of zones with hard lines, to kind of open out that hard line into the idea of tones in a very open-ended way through Ecotone, and could also include both human as well as other more than human life, isolated or abandoned. So I hope that answers your question. We have an anonymous attendee asking or saying, "Hey Fotini, thank you for your beautiful lecture. You spoke of non-human collaborations as embedded in the Ecotone methods. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on how you imagine those being enabled."
Yeah, that's a very good question. And yeah, also moments where one also has to reflect own uses of language and expressions. So, of course, if you speak of collaboration, this would mean that two actors are willing to collaborate with each other. In the context of human and non-human collaborations, one could critically ask, yeah, do the non-human actors want to collaborate with us? If they're not, how could one then talk of collaboration? But in the end, I mean that in a way, working with them and not seeing them as as I mentioned, passive backgrounds, and they are just there, and to pay attention and to integrate them in planning and decision-making processes by giving them also a right, actually, and to see them as, yeah, in a way, participants or active agents in the whole process. But as I said, one could critically discuss, at what point you can talk of a collaboration, if maybe this is it's a human concept, and yeah.
Thanks, Fotini. I hope that that answers that question. I mean, we'll take up a final question if there is, or anybody wants to come in. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be a question or comment coming from anybody. So we'll draw this session to a close. That was a wonderful talk. And thank you for setting the tone for the lectures and the conversations to come in this Sea Conversation series of Monsoon 2022. It's been a pleasure to have you, Fotini, and we look forward to further conversations with you in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us for this first session of Sea Conversations. Our next Sea Conversations lecture will be on 1st July. Lindsay Bremner will be the speaker, and she'll be talking about monsoon as method. So thank you very much. Thanks once again, all of you. I think somebody's asked a question. Yeah. Well, there's one more question, so I'll just kind of come in right now. I'm going to take it before we end. Thank you, Fotini, for these insightful conversation. Ecotones, as we know now, or the transitional areas between two kinds of spaces, the blur, has studying and experimenting with these blurs led to a development of new methodologies or perspectives of viewing the non-blur spaces. As we know, these transitions have served the living populations of the world an opportunity to evolve into something else and become adaptable to the non-blur transitions. Is there anything in particular you would like to highlight? Aditya Boite asks this question.
Yes, so that's not the easiest, shortest question for the end. I'm trying to delve into the question. So if now the question is gone, but it's here in the middle. Studying, experimenting with these blurs led to new methodologies of viewing the non-blur spaces. Yes, I'm having trouble to fully understand the question, or to the expression of non-blur transitions and non-blur spaces, because in my perspective, the idea would be that, that hybridity is always the case, that one would depart from the non-blur spaces, but I'm not fully grasping, or I think I cannot answer in a good way. Sorry.
Aditya, would you like to come in ask the question if you're around? Dipti, can we get Aditya in? Yeah, hi Aditya. Would you like to ask the question yourself? Because it's been difficult to understand it.
Hi, Fotini. Hi, Robert. So that's what, like, the one thing I wanted to understand is that you've been experimenting and kind of developing new methods and understanding these spaces, these ecotones. So does studying and experimenting with ecotones for such a long amount of time, has it affected your perspective in understanding spaces which are not generally included in ecotones?
Yes, so first of all, these experiments have been taking place since a year, and I've tried them in an educational setting. So what has happened is like that concepts for, as you call them, non-blur spaces have developed, but there's also like changes in education do not immediately show in changes in the city planning, and so in order, the perspectives have changed, namely that those binaries need to be overcome in cities in order to create, using the word, healthy urban environments. But I cannot tell you like how it actually takes place and changes in practice the infrastructures. No.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. The notes were super helpful. The whole conversation and everything really helped me understand, because right now we have a module going based on these ecotones and spaces that are in between the blur. So yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fotini, once again.
A bit of blurriness in the end. In talking about blur, a bit of blurriness is also okay, I think.
So I'll once again like to thank you. Our next lecture, next session is on 1st July 2022 by Lindsay Bremner. We'll be talking about monsoon as methods. I will also like to take this opportunity to thank the Shared Ecologies program of the Sharma Foundation, along with the Urban Center Mumbai, for supporting this lecture series. And thank you, all of you, for joining us once again. Bye-bye.